What is going on, future me? I hope all is well. I hope you know you're having the best day ever, as usual. Living up to your utmost potential and everything else. With that said, I do want to go into my sort of pre-market plan for the week. What sort of my outlook is, especially with it being Thanksgiving week and everything else. Just want to kind of get a glimpse into sort of what I could be expecting for this coming week, what moves I'd like to see play out and set up for obviously the weeks thereafter, especially since it'll be a short one for all of us, or for most of us at least. I would hope. So with that said, I want to kind of just jump straight into it. We have the dollar pulled up, the DXY, the monthly chart at the moment. As I mentioned in previous pre-market plans, I mean, especially with that sort of confirmed evening star now from last week's sort of bearish momentum, we are looking like we're going to make a move into 103 potentially, right? Well, this is a sort of a monthly level that we broke out of. Just makes the most sense, obviously seeing, looking left and seeing the amount of retests and touches we've gotten into this area. It just makes sense from a monthly perspective that we'd be heading into 103 and at least tapping it. You know what I mean? Forming a wick at that sort of level type of thing. And it becomes a much more clear picture when we look into sort of the weekly and daily sort of time frames. Of course, when it comes to indexes like this, I'm not going to, go into intraday levels like 1 hour, 4 hour type of thing. I like to focus, of course, on higher time frame price action with indexes like, the dollar, GBP, JPY, this whole thing. Those currency indexes as a whole. Just, of course, my preference. Everyone's different. So jumping straight into the weekly, as you guys can kind of see, right? Well, of course, we closed the last 2 weeks sort of bearish, especially with the breakup structure up here at this 382, this very small range we were trading in at the moment. And it was something that I did point out prior to moving all the way into 103 that we do have this 618 level. As you guys can see, I've drawn a zone around it as well. This is kind of the makings of a potential support, a potential bounce, at least into, that 382, that retest of that previous structure we just broke down from, with that very big candle to the downside. Like we call this like a sort of a thrust candle, if you will. So with that, it's very common to see those sort of those sort of bounces, those retraces, prior to a further move down. And when I look at it from the perspective of like the pairs that I trade, gold specifically, of course, dollar strength equals, in this particular case, gold weakness in many cases, and we are seeing a retest on gold. So I'm using this very closely in confluence with gold price action, especially considering we could be bouncing into the 382 at 109.50 area, if not a little bit lower than that, prior to making a move back down on the dollar. It just makes the most sense the way we're seeing gold retrace now after its large move as well. So I'm just using those two things hand in hand as I make my decisions in the market. Looking at the daily, and of course I'll get into gold and everything else a little bit later. Looking at the daily for the dollar, you can see the support we found here much more clear. I mean, this is a respected level all in all around 105, 105.50 area. We have, looking left, a test of this level, a breakdown, another one, a breakdown thereafter before turning this into support twice and now a third with this sort of rounded bottom that we're seeing on the daily here. Outside of the 109 level I just mentioned on the weekly, we do have a very local level here around 108, 108.50. So we could see a much more shallow retest before a move lower, or see that pretty deep retest into previous structure at 109, 109.50 area. All in all, if we're going to continue being bearish, at least from a technical level, of course, there's a ton of news, in these next, I believe it's like Tuesday, Wednesday of this week, that can act as catalyst to make price a little bit more volatile. But overall, if we want to remain bearish, I'm looking at this particular level around 105 area, 104 area as a bounce or break level, right? If we can continue using this level as support, we still have a floor. Until we break that, of course, that's when things are going to, kind of get ugly, at least as far as the chart is concerned. We start looking at previous ranges and looking left and everything else to see where price could potentially fall. But at the moment, we are looking like, we're finding support at 105, which is great. I would like to see how price reacts to 108 area. If it, blows past that, would of course like to see that previous structure retest at 109, potentially 110 area. And then if I were to just take this fib off, for example, we start looking at local levels like right here, the swing high to swing low. it lines up, right? Like we look at the 618, we look at the 786. 109 makes sense, and obviously in confluence with it being a level of structure, we also have this fib confluence here as well. So it's just a matter of seeing how it reacts to these two levels. Again, 108 and the 109.50 area as far as retest before you move lower are concerned. If we could reclaim levels above that, like around 110, of course, that would be great for dollar bulls, if you will. But as far as what my plan is for gold, especially wanting to long it, especially, having broken the range, and of course I'll get into all this later when I cover it, it would serve me obviously a lot better to see that retest and then a further breakdown of the dollar if I'm going to want to long gold. So overall, hope this makes sense just as far as the dollar is concerned. Next, I would like to get into, I would just like to just kind of touch up on JPYBasket and the British pound just for sort of last week's sake. As I mentioned, right, we had this sort of channel break. We're just moving within a range on JPYBasket. I'm not making any sort of rash decisions. Monday, they're releasing their core CPI, so that might be something to, of course, take into consideration when I look at this particular index. But as long as we're moving within this range, of course, reclaim of this range low could move into this range mid. As I've said, time and time again, nothing super crazy going on from my end or from my perspective. Just looking at the chart. The only sort of thing that would pique my interest and kind of be a cause for concern for me is a break and retest above this 8,000 level. Of course, especially wanting to use this in confluence with GJ, right? If we break above 8,000, of course, GJ shorts extremely valid, and then on the other side of that, breaks back below this sort of range low here that we made a couple weeks ago at 7150, 7160 area. Would then be wanting to, of course, long that. Nothing super clear as long as we're moving within this range, though. Nothing that necessarily piques my interest. Of course, awesome that we had a close with strength on Thursday of last week, but again, nothing that's necessarily sticking out to me. Moving as usual. Yen is still weak. I'm still of that sentiment that the yen will continue to be weak. So that, of course, would incline me to want to look for longs at certain levels on GJ, especially when we look now at GBP futures. We are seeing some strength. I did get a chance because especially when we get these sort of reclaims on weekly levels, that's when it becomes really fun, right? Because then we start looking back at old ranges, very important levels, things of that sort. Where could price potentially be going next? And as far as, overall, let's start with the monthly, right? These next 2 weeks, I would say, just from a price action perspective, are pretty important to me. Just to kind of understand where exactly this GBP monthly candle is going to close, right? We have these two scenarios. We're reclaiming weekly levels and everything else, and then when we look at the monthly, right, we're right at what could be, a potentially important SR level, right? This could be a break back, a break below that 121 level, a retest of 121, and then a move lower, or of course, the second scenario, as the arrow points out, a reclaim above, retest, and a move higher, eventual channel break on the monthly and everything else. So I would like to see, just where this candle sort of closes. Can we see upper wick creation and spell out a potential rejection of this level, or will we close with strength above this line at 121? Like what could that bring, right? So of course, there's always a little bit of nuance and looking at price action and trying to interpret it. That's what I'd be wanting to see, right? Like, are we going to close above that line or are we not? You know what I mean? So it's just to kind of simplify it, right? Looking at the weekly, of course, we have this weekly reclaim, channel break and everything else. And now we're running into, as I've said previously, old ranges, right? Old levels of significance that we could be retesting, sort of ranging within as we try to reclaim these levels or potentially break back below them. And of course, that first one is right here at 120, right at 121 sort of deal. Of course, like I said, with these next 2 weeks being fairly important to me, I would like to see how these next 2 weekly candles react to this particular level at 121. Of course, clean break into that with a bit of strength. I would then expect the next sort of level of interest being 126. But as long as we do see GBP strength, of course, that would lead me to want to get long on GJ. If we see GBP weakness, a break back below this weekly reclaim, then of course I would want I would expect the other side of that. So I'm just kind of monitoring it. Again, these next 2 weeks to me are kind of pivotal. I would like to see just kind of how this plays out overall from a technical perspective. We look at the daily. Closed with a little bit of weakness last week, right? Like sort of a rounded top. Could see this retest into 116 before a move higher this week. We have sort of a retest this week, push next. But there's no way to really know. As it stands, of course, with this channel break and everything else, it looks bullish, but I'm really more relying on these higher time frame sort of levels and candles to guide me for this particular index. But I hope that makes sense. Again, still kind of moving according to plan. Would like to see where we lie within these monthly levels at the monthly close. Excuse me, that was a lot. To kind of determine, what our next steps are or what I could expect. So hope that makes sense. Gonna jump straight into GJ to start. Of course, being on the monthly, we can start at the monthly. Monthly cup and handle is still valid, right? Like I feel like I've said that week after week, and it still holds true, right? Like we're wicking to the downside, no, crazy breaks of structure or any, crazy reversals or anything of that sort. Just from a monthly perspective, of course, we'd like to stay above that sort of level of structure here, which is also like sort of a weekly range high, as we'll get into shortly, to continue to prove to me at least that we'll be moving into the complete move of that cup and handle. Going into the weekly, we are still sort of playing around within this range, right? We closed back within the weekly range last week, and we've maintained our sort of head below that. Going into the close of this week we're coming off of. Excuse me. So of course this looks pretty much like, especially with the strength in that candle with the momentum it had last week. You could see, of course, long way to the upside, solid body downward with this last week's candle, and the strength that it closed with could, make you believe that this is like a higher low sort of deal. Still not really comfortable getting long unless we get back above and reclaim this weekly range high. Excuse me, almost getting out of breath here. Like, but overall for me to get bullish, again, would want to see us close above this weekly range high, potentially see another retest and move higher into the 170s. If we can't get that, of course, I would want to be shorting it from the range high thereafter, like 167.50, 168 sort of levels, from a weekly sort of perspective. We'll just have to see. Like, we're at a critical level overall, right? Either it's pretty much a bounce or break level for me, especially when we look at it on the weekly. Going into the daily, I know that I spelled out a potential head and shoulders last week on the daily time frame. As you can see right here, the measured move, I believe, was into 160 with a potential stop at 162. Looks like we stopped up pretty short. This is a very strong level here at 162, this previous sort of daily range mid. So I did expect a bounce from that level, and now it's basically just thrusted us right into a very sort of pivotal level overall, right? Again, this sort of daily and weekly range high, also like the June high and everything else. So I'd like to see, of course, how price reacts to jumping into the zone. Of course, last week we did close with a little bit of weakness, this sort of wick, but we're still overall above this this level of structure here, this sort of zone. So the next sort of most probable move for me would be this move into the 168 sort of range high, and that's where I'll be waiting to see whether or not price wicks into this level and rejects, or closes with strength above it to get long or short. It becomes a lot more clear. Of course, I'll cover this on lower time frames. So that's just my ideology behind it. Of course, as we have this sort of head and shoulders here, you could make a case for I wouldn't call this a neckline retest, but I would call this more so like a lower high sort of, lower high and lower low sort of structure forming. So something definitely to take into consideration. But when we look at the weekly and monthly overall long-term uptrending bias, I mean, we have to see, especially being at such a significant level. There we have the 4 hour. As you guys can see, I did put a balloon here, a bouncer break, sells below / buys above this June high, that 168 level. That's really, again, the reaction I'm sort of waiting for at these levels to see whether or not I'm going to be getting long or short. If we see obviously clear rejection, I'll be wanting to get short, break and retest above that. Longs, very self-explanatory, super straightforward and everything else. As far as levels are concerned, we do have this potential ascending triangle into that June high. I actually do have a position open on this that's like up 20 pips. Horrible entry though, and I'll go into on the 1 hour. I would definitely like to be a bit more long, closer to like 166.20s. If I were to be long, then of course I'll cover it shortly here. I was not near that. I believe I was like 20 pips off type of thing. But in any case, whatever. So as far as structure is concerned, as far as what I'm looking for, we could expect, as long as we keep our heads above this sort of level, above water here at, I believe, 166.20, 166 sort of level, and we could break back above this range mid at 166, 167. Then I'd of course expect that retest into the June high. But if we start with, if we open the market, or excuse me, if the market opens with weakness at this level and breaks back below like 166 sort of level, 166 or 166, 165.90 sort of level, we could see, of course, that retest into 164 and potentially lower than that. But overall, especially since we've bounced from this level so many times, a break above this is, potentially bullish, which is why I have a long opened at the moment. But my hands are kind of tied at the moment, especially with the position I'm currently in. I would like to actually close it at market open and sit on my hands until I see sort of how price reacts to the levels that we're currently at. Because again, it is a significant level, this daily and weekly range high, to see what our next steps are. That leads me into the 1 hour. As you guys can see, we're at a very local level of resistance at the moment. This is pretty much the trade that I took, and as you guys can see, right, I would have liked to have been at like 166.20 for an entry. It happens. I mean, obviously not one of my best entries type of thing. I've had much cleaner entries, but I like to position myself towards the end of the week going into next, because I find a lot of success that way, especially with having the whole pre-market plan put together and everything else. That's kind of how my trading works. Excuse me. So with that said, right, especially wanting to let go of this position at the open, I would like to see a reaction and retest to this very clean level of structure. As you guys can see, we were forming this potential ascending triangle. We had this strong SR level with weekly candle closes on multiple occasions here. Built a base there and eventually broke this sort of previous level of resistance and retested it, right, at 166.20. So I'd like to see a reaction to those levels. We are sort of in this range between 166.20 and this new sort of local high at 166.90. So of course, a break above 166.90 would be bullish into the September 22 high, sort of June high from there. And a break below that would be bearish into the 165.50 sort of area. And, obviously breaks lower than that would be a bearish reversal to me. And I'll be looking for earlier signs of that as we see price reacting, excuse me, to the September and June highs on lower time frames. So I hope that makes sense. I know that I kind of go off on tangents into that, so I might speak a little bit fast for my future self. But overall, just to kind of recap on GJ, we're moving within this range at the moment between 166.90 and 166.20. I would like to see, of course, a break above 166.90 to get bullish into the September and June highs. If we cannot do that, I'll be monitoring rejections of those levels into 165.50 and lower than that. As far as much more near term, from a 1 hour perspective, if we cannot hold 166.20 and retest with strength to continue with buys, a break below that into 165.50, excuse me, could be bearish with a potential reversal thereafter. So I hope that makes sense. It's pretty much clear as day. We have very clean levels of structure and everything else. Again, would like to get longed around 166.20 if we have retest with strength. Buys would be valid, otherwise they would not be. So again, hope that made sense. Going into gold, let's go ahead and get the monthly queued up here. All right. So as you guys can see, this is the monthly for gold. As you guys can see, right, we potentially had like last month, I believe that was October. Last month we had a potential break back below 167, that sort of range on a monthly sort of from like a monthly perspective into potentially 1550 or lower than that. We did get a range reclaim on the monthly. Of course, there are 10 days left in the month. Anything can happen. But with that said, we are back within the monthly range, which is bullish, for the moment, especially with dollar weakness and everything else that I've covered in the beginning. Looking at it from the weekly, right? We had a very strong week, the week of the 7th of November. Huge, huge momentum to the upside. Pretty much broke back into previous ranges and everything else. Extremely strong move. When you get moves like that, it's only right to see retests, retracements, and everything sort of in between thereafter to have a small correction of the move before a move higher. Of course, personally, with a candle like this, a bullish engulfing candle like this with so much strength, I'm gonna be wanting to get long. When that happens, it depends on when the retrace is done, right? There are a couple of different levels that we can look at on smaller time frames to make a case for that. But when I see price closing like this, especially last week, that's all I'm, thinking about. Where are we going to retrace to? What's the level we need to retest? And everything else. And I spelled out two levels last week at 1756 and 1725, which I still stand by, and we'll dive a bit deeper into. So looking at the daily now, as you guys can see, we've had this sort of rounded top at this previous level of structure here at 1782. We started to move lower. We did get an intraday bounce at 1756 on the 4-hour, one that I did get to catch. But thereafter, we started breaking through that level later into the week. And overall, for me, it just makes a much clearer case, especially on higher time frames, for that retest into 1725. As you guys can see, we have this daily close below 1756. And we also have a local fib in confluence, this sort of 618 and 786 in confluence with that retest at 1725. Overall, though, just looking at structure as a whole and just looking left, for the bigger picture, you can see that it is a clean level. We've bounced from this level multiple times. We use it as resistance, use it as support. Previously as well. It's just a very clean level for price to come into and potentially bounce from. So I would be wanting to get long, of course, at 1725 overall as far as a retest is concerned, and that arrow right here sort of outlines that. Going into the 4-hour, of course, with the retracement, we will be seeing, it's expected, right, to be seeing bearish price action. It's a bullish retest, so of course you have to go lower before you can go higher and everything else. So I like to, of course, look for confluences, and we have a pretty solid one to me here. We have a head and shoulders that's formed, a neckline that's already been broken. The neckline retest could be playing out early into this week before that move lower, and then that measured move for the actual head and shoulders moves us straight into 1725, 1730 area, which would be, of course, the area that I'm looking for a retest on. So it just made sense to me, and of course I'm lining all these things up for myself and my future self to make those decisions as they arise. But overall, with all these different confluences, it strengthens my conviction a ton to see that 1725 retest before a move higher. And then as far as the head and shoulder pattern is concerned, we do have a rounded bottom on the 1-hour, which would lead me to believe that we're going to be seeing a neckline retest, at least into 1756 before a move lower, which all these arrows outline of all, also placed a balloon for myself here to watch that 4-hour neckline retest. As you guys can see, just looking left, right, we've bounced from this level multiple times. We've now broken it. Just made sense to retest it before we move lower. Measured moves brings us obviously into like 1730, 1725 area, which is what I'm looking for. Excuse me. But overall, if we can break above that 1756 level and hold, of course, I would be expecting moves into 1772 and everything else, and would be playing it level to level as always, because that would mean, of course, we have a small deviation here at 1756 before the reclaim and higher. But overall, this is just the scenario as far as the neckline retest and everything else is concerned. Just a scenario for price getting to 1725. Of course, if we reclaim 1756, go higher towards 1770. The 1756 shallow retest is still valid with that small deviation. So I hope that made sense. Future me, that pretty much sums it for my pre-market plan. I hope that made sense. Overall, again, just kind of recap gold. Have this head and shoulders, expecting If we don't have this sort of deviation and small retest here at 1756, we could see a much deeper pullback into 1725 in confluence with this head and shoulders here, as well as these, obviously this daily structure, this rounded top here, and then this very clean level of structure here at 1725. It just makes a lot more sense for price to retest and bounce from that, especially after the amount of momentum we close with on this daily candle. So that's kind of my recap. I hope that made sense. As far as last week is concerned, of course, I held this position into its target. We also got let me back up here. I had this position open. I actually had my stops at break even. Basically stopped out at break even here, but I also had a buy limit here as well. So thankfully I did get to ride it into 1774, only like 2.5% gain, nothing super significant or anything of that sort. And I ended up getting burned. I can't remember where. I would have to look back on my journal and everything else. But regardless, I did get, just to kind of update myself and everything else, I did get a chance to hold that position shortly into the weekly open before eventually getting stopped at a break even and then riding it back up thereafter. So overall, again, future me, I hope this was clear for you. I hope that, overall you're following your plan, you're doing what you need to do, staying consistent, and living your best life, man. Love you lots. God bless you. Life is hard, but you're harder. And just take care. God bless.